This is our July Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force meeting. We have a great presentation, really 3 presentations for you today on homeownership and housing counseling and 3 excellent speakers. I'm really excited. Before we dive into that, we do have some policy updates as we like to do here at NHC for our Restoring Neighborhoods group. And Caitlin, are you going to be able to start with those?
Yeah, so I can start with an appropriations update. Last night, the House THUD Subcommittee on Appropriations voted to advance the THUD Appropriations Bill. So this bill includes modest increases to most of the rental assistance programs, but that increase is not enough to maintain all of the current households that are receiving assistance. The bill is short at least $1.5 billion, and there's been estimates that 140,000 vouchers could be lost due to not enough money for increases. And then outside of rental assistance programs, just about everything else in the bill received flat funding or a cut. And I want to note home and CDBG, they were both cut by $100 million. But since home receives a much smaller allocation than CDBG, the cut is more impactful. So CDBG received a 3% cut while home received an 11% cut. And a few other provisions in the bill. Notably, it did not take up President Trump's request to eliminate the National Housing Trust Fund or to raise the amount of income that tenants contribute to rent payments from 30% to 35%. However, this bill did include his request to eliminate the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And so moving forward on the bill, the full Appropriations Committee will consider the bill next Monday evening. House appropriators are trying to get all 12 bills to the floor before August recess. And notably, the Senate has pushed back their August recess till the 3rd week in August. The House has not announced any plans to push back their August recess. But we just want to keep you guys updated on that. And the other side of this is that now the House is picking up activity, the Senate is starting to pick up activity as well. So we'll probably see the Senate THUD Subcommittee and the Senate Appropriations Committee start moving their bill in the next couple of weeks. And so this brings me to my next update, which is on the Housing Week of Action. So this is a really great way to get involved in the budget process. So this National Week of Action is starting on July 22nd and running through July 29th. The week features a call-in day, a Twitter storm day. Representative Barbara Lee will be hosting a press event on the Hill, and there are over 30 local events being held across the country. So I encourage you all to check out their website. It's ourhomes-ourvoices.org, and I'll make sure to include that in the notes from today's meeting. But they list all the local events and a ton of resources to make engagement with this round of the budgetary process really simple. And that's all for me.
Thanks, Caitlin. And just a quick pause to remind folks, in case some of you are new, we are happy to take questions about the policy updates and about the upcoming presentations. Just feel free to send them through the chat box, the question box at any time, and we will address any questions at the end. But do feel free to send those as they occur to you. And we will include information about the Housing Week of Action in the notes for today's meeting. Next update, just want to make folks aware that the Federal Housing Finance Agency has proposed housing goals for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac for fiscal year 2018 through 2020. They are looking for comments on those goals by September 5th. And they are pretty similar to previous years, but are looking at an increase, I believe, on the low-income single-family side. Apologies, I don't. Because of our technical difficulties, my notes are not accessible at the moment, but we'll provide more detailed information about that in the notes. And I also wanted to mention that HUD appointments are moving forward. In case you missed it, the Trump administration has announced their intent to nominate Assistant Secretary of HUD's Community Planning and Development Department, also Fair Housing, and General Counsel, which is Mr. Ratcliffe, Paul Compton, and Ann Farias, I believe. And actually their nomination hearing was just announced and will be next Tuesday with the Senate Banking Committee, so July 18th. And Pam Patinaud has been nominated as HUD Deputy Secretary, and she has had her nomination hearing, and now we are waiting for her full Senate confirmation to make that official. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our speakers. So this month we have 3 great speakers for you talking about the nexus between homeownership and neighborhoods and how housing counseling fits in with that as well. So we have Craig Nickerson with the Nickerson Group, Sarah Jarecki, who's the Assistant Secretary, of Housing Counseling for HUD, and Lot Diaz, who's the Vice President of Housing and Community Development for the newly renamed Unidos US, formerly National Council of La Raza. So give me just 1 second to pull up their presentation. All right, so we will turn things over to Craig to get us started. Craig, are you there?
Sometimes if you unlock your mute button, it works better. So, yeah, Rebecca, you can move to that first substantive slide here, and we'll get started. So, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Rebecca, can you hear me? So, just to sort of maybe emphasize what Rebecca, her introduction of our topic here, the folks on this phone are well-versed on neighborhood decay and deterioration and recovery from the recession. We don't want to rehash that. But what we do want to do is discuss 2 aspects of it. One, the relationship of neighborhood decline and the rate of homeownership in those neighborhoods. And 2, the emerging potentially very important role that nonprofits can play in facilitating that homeownership. Maybe some significant opportunities that may not be readily apparent. Let me be a little clearer. So, neighborhood deterioration and recovery are not a new phenomena. Like people, neighborhoods get sick, and we can't just treat the symptoms when a neighborhood is deteriorating, whether that's abandonment or price stagnation or lack of resident confidence. We need to deal with the root cause, and I happen to believe that a lot of these left behind markets, these markets that have not benefited from the recovery, are not seeing escalating property values, it's largely this time a function of not only the housing implosion that happened back in 2008, but the loss of homeownership that continues in those neighborhoods. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to suggest to you that the nonprofit housing providers are really, I think, integral, important, essential to getting us to a better place for those neighborhoods. I've been accused of hyperbole in the past, and I'm probably going to be accused of it here, but I really think we're close to an inflection point on the near horizon in 2017 for homebuyer counseling and education. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about here. How do we institutionalize the role of the nonprofit providers as facilitators of first-time homeownership, particularly in these hard-hit markets? All right? So you can see the slide. I'm not going to go through all these slides word for word, obviously, but, these left-behind neighborhoods are, marked by negative equity still, owner-occupants, the people who live, the residents in these neighborhoods who want to buy and believe they can buy a home often can't compete with the cash buyer. Lenders, mortgage lenders, tend to have little appetite for low-value mortgages. They make a percentage of the mortgage origination, and so the same amount of time goes into an $80,000 mortgage as it does for a $380,000 mortgage. In fact, one might argue it's even more time-consuming on the lower-value mortgage. Appraisals remain a problem in distressed neighborhoods. Purchase rehab mortgages are rare and costly. And of course, many times single-family rental in distressed markets end up being more expensive than owning the very same homes. This is not to say that rental housing is a problem. It's to suggest that many people who aspire to be homeowners in their communities are being prohibited from doing so. Next slide. Now, this is just a really kind of fascinating chart. I won't dwell on it, but this is a somewhat dated, it's 2013 chart, but it shows you in some communities how fundamentally different the single-family housing stock is today as opposed to before the housing crisis. If you look at Phoenix, what you see there is that Phoenix has increased the number of single-family rentals by about 115,000. The vertical indicator is the number of properties, the increase, change in the number, and the horizontal, the bottom, is the percentage change. So in Phoenix's case, it's about an 80% increase in single-family detached rental stock and about 115,000 individual units. New Orleans, they've more than doubled the percentage of single-family that are rental, and that amounts to about 35,000 of their housing stock. These particular cities are identified here because there's some training, some workshops that we're doing in those markets. Let's go on, Rebecca. I'm not going to dwell on this next slide too much. It's simply another way to characterize how the housing stock fabric is changing. That turquoise color, that one family 35%, used to be something like 21% not too many years ago. It's grown to 35%. Clearly, a lot of our single-family homes in these distressed markets have converted to rental. But it's more than that. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that, as most of you know, the homeownership rate itself is much lower than it has historically been. Today, we're experiencing levels that are lower. This chart will show you lower than even 1995. In fact, if we can go to the next slide, you'll see that last year, we hit the lowest homeownership rate since the numbers were recorded, back to 1965. It's the 12th consecutive year last year that we had a decreasing homeownership rate, and we went as low as 62.9%. That's the lowest since 1965. But I've got some more bad news for us. If we go to the next slide. And many of you have heard me talk about this because it's alarming. But when Harvard, when the Joint Center at Harvard did their State of the Nation's Housing Report 2 years ago, they went into depth on where is this homeownership rate actually, this loss in the homeownership rate actually occurring geographically. They looked at 50,000 census tracts. That's about 80% of all census tracts in America. And they found that actually the homeownership rate is not decreasing in most of those markets. It's either increasing or just modestly staying about the same, or maybe a few percentage points down. But in 5,000 tracts, just 10%, they saw a greater than 10% reduction. In fact, the average decline in those markets was 14%. And overall, just again, in those 5,000 markets, that accounted for 95% of the entire decline in number of homeownership households in America. When they looked at what are the common denominators, what correlates with that, they found that it's neighborhoods where there's predominantly a minority community, minority households. So that's the neighborhoods we're talking about here, the neighborhoods where you're focused, that we're talking about here today, and that you do monthly on these calls, discuss what we do about them. So the next couple of slides just provide some information on the minority homeownership rate vis-a-vis the overall homeownership rate. You'll see here on the slide 8 that the overall homeownership rate back here in 2015 was 63.7%. In 2016, it went down, as we mentioned, a little bit from there. Today, it stands at about the same number, 63.7%. That's after the first quarter of 2017. And you can see for yourself here, the homeownership rate for African Americans today is actually at 42.7, slightly below the 43% you see here. The Hispanic rate today is at 46.6, slightly above the rate you see there. The white homeownership rate in America is now at 71.8%. It's not on this chart, but it's 71.8%. So we have a huge gap here. And so it's not only a household or ethnic gap, it's also a geographic, a market-by-market gap. And yet we know, if we can move on, Rebecca, to slide 8, we all know the benefits of homeownership. I don't want to be the preacher to the choir here, but we know it's a great way to build wealth for families. It is the principal way that low and moderate income families accrue wealth in this nation, both through the pay down of principal as well as equity appreciation. And it's a real leveraged investment, right? I mean, try to open up a certificate of deposit for $10,000 with a down payment of $1,000 and expect to accrue interest on $10,000. It just doesn't work that way, but that is the way it works with owning a home. And you can see all these other reasons that it makes sense. Creating jobs, that reduces neighborhood crime. There's still studies that are validating these points. Achieves a sense of personal and family satisfaction and stability. And perhaps most important for this discussion today, it does help create more neighborhood stakeholders. I want to get to the bottom line here. There's a next chart that just sort of underscores the net wealth thing. Many of you have seen charts like this. Thanks to Mark Fleming for sending it to me. But that top line there, the lower quintile, you can see that about 80% of all net wealth for that lowest income fifth of America comes from owning a home. If you look at even those below 80% of median income, that's the second line, it's above 50%. So this is a really important issue on a personal level as well as community. Adding to the importance of this to neighborhoods and increases in homeownership is this next slide, which you've seen this in many forms over the last year or so. The phenomena that America looks like the pie chart on the left here, with about 68% of American households being white. But if you look on the right side, you see that the increase, 76%, literally 76% of all new households between 2015 and 2025 will be Black, Hispanic, and Asian American. So a fundamental difference there. And so how we reach them with our mortgage products and how we reach them with the sort of outreach and sourcing and preparation that nonprofit providers can do is going to be essential. All right, so we get to the bottom line here on my presentation before we get into the more detailed discussions that Sarah and Lot will present to you. So here's the way I look at this situation. I'm a fervent believer in homebuyer preparation. And the opportunity ahead of us is that more than ever before, the mortgage industry needs us. It needs pre-purchase counseling, and I don't even want to call it counseling, but it needs pre-purchase help to spur buying, both as a sourcing tool, as a way of dispelling myths about the home buying process. We have incredible myths today. Fannie Mae did a study recently that disclosed that 75% of respondents, these are renters, believe that aspire to be homeowners, believe that we're not aware that you can get into a home with as little as 3%. Another study recently showed that that 60% of wannabe homeowners believe you needed at least a 10% down payment. We've got to change that, and who better than a community-based nonprofit to engage consumers and help them understand the truth about homeownership. Secondly, many of these housing counseling agencies now have deep experience on the back end of the business, right? You've all helped with foreclosure prevention and helping people stay in their homes, and that's helped create a more robust understanding of the market dynamic, but also the mortgage dynamic that can be transitioned to the front end of the business and leveraged more effectively. We have, thanks to Sarah and her team, they've greatly elevated, in my opinion, the HUD-approved counseling agency standard. There's a better decorum and regime and consistency of approach here that is what lenders are looking for. Fourth, we have technology today across the board in the mortgage industry that is going to create opportunities for the nonprofit provider. They're already available to lenders. There's free access to whether someone is ready or not for a mortgage, and a lot of that's going to be conveyed to the nonprofit community, either has been conveyed through the web-based trainings that are out there or are about to be conveyed in other ways. Technology will also help us document what we're doing and ensure that we can be compensated for what we're doing. And then lastly, and again, thanks to HUD in many respects, as well as NeighborWorks and other organizations, we have much more empirical evidence that counseling actually does improve mortgage loan performance. I'm sure Sarah will mention that. Yet we have challenges. Counseling is not integral to the home buying process yet. It's not predictable. We don't have predictable, sustainable, fair compensation for the home buyer preparation work we're doing. It's not a reality yet. And the industry itself, real estate professionals and lenders, still have a somewhat negative perception of the role that we can and do play. So, Rebecca, I'm going to skip the next slide, or you can show it to everyone, I guess, quickly here. It's just a list of some of those 10 myths that we think exist profoundly in the marketplace that the nonprofit community can best dispel. Owning a home is more expensive than renting. That's not true. Homeownership is too risky. Not true. Need 20% down. You get it. So you can see many of these misunderstandings. Foreclosures. Only 12% of those that experienced a short sale or foreclosure in the past, since 2007, have actually been able to buy a new home. Many of them think they never can buy another home. So let's go to my last slide. This is sort of the transition slide, I think, to Sarah and to Lot. So I really think if we are going to see this inflection point and make the nonprofit counseling education regime integral to the home buying process, we need new messaging. We can't use our old arguments. We need to talk about things in a different way so that we can get the attention of the lenders and the real estate professionals and gain their trust. We need to describe the new role we're playing, the new and improved role. We need to talk about sourcing channels. And if I had to do this bullet again, I would probably take out the subordinate phrase, essentially the mortgage brokers of the future. I'm not suggesting that nonprofits are mortgage brokers. That requires different licensing and obligations. But the fact is, if people don't trust the process and don't know how to even start the process, aren't they likely to go to that street corner nonprofit that can give them some free, honest, fair, unbiased advice? Fourth, that technology. I've been talking to a lot of the lenders. You've seen it with some of the lenders who are making exponential gains in their share of the market through technology. There's a lot of technology that is flowing down that I think will hit the nonprofit market in the next literally 3 to 6 months. And then lastly, this is just for me now, I can't say that everybody on the phone call would agree with this. For 20 years we've been saying that counseling probably is not the best word. We need to make a fundamental shift to talk about nonprofits providing homeownership counseling or advisory services, not something that sounds remedial to the consumer. So the point here in summary is I think we're in a potential opportunity inflection point that is rare for an industry to become more integral to the process. And the more we align ourselves, the more we're all using the same verbiage and talking about the same promise and using the same new arguments, the more the reality, the more it will become a reality. Sarah?
Thanks, Craig.
Hopefully that teases some of your comments.
Let's turn it over to Sarah now.
Well, thank you so much. And I do want to thank Craig for that phenomenal lead up, but also I need to take a moment and thank the National Housing Conference and this task force for your work. Most of my life I've been very much a place-based, neighborhood-based, community development kind of person. And it's so interesting today for me to think about the program of housing counseling through a place-based lens, because obviously it's very people-focused. And in the context of Craig's remarks, I just want to say, you know, a little bit different words for what he said. that housing counseling in a place-based context really is primarily about market demand for creating neighborhoods of choice and creating demand for investment and asset building and value building in what we used to call underserved neighborhoods. It can help the people living in those neighborhoods now meeting their existing needs of meeting the needs of existing residents by helping them address barriers to savings and asset building and home ownership for those who are renters or those who were homeowners and aren't any longer, or those who may become victimized of scams in some of the rental and real estate actors out there. So there's a real role for housing counseling in place-based activities, and I hope this presentation will help build on that. Next slide. But what I'm really going to talk about here is a deeper dive into what in the world is HUD up to with the housing counseling program, our own inflection point, not just as an industry with the mortgage market, but also around certification, and then some resources and other information for you. Next slide. So some of you are very familiar with our program, and you'll bear with me for a minute. I just want to say that HUD regulates a network of approximately 1,900 nonprofit and municipal or state housing counseling agencies. We definitely monitor compliance, conflicts of interest, and quality, but we also provide a lot of technical support and capacity building, connecting clients to agencies and providing training and even grant funding. And I understand the House budget last night gave a slight increase to the housing counseling level for 18 over the President's request, although it's a little reduction from the 17 appropriated. Next slide. It's worthwhile to just know what housing counseling is and isn't, because as Craig said, we do have a little naming problem. So let's start with it's not drug testing or some of the other things people think about when they see counseling. From HUD's point of view, it's independent, expert advice that's customized to the need of the consumer. It's not just education that you're being talked at, but it's really working together for their individualized needs. And it has to include the elements on the next slide, Rebecca. An intake, an individualized budget, an analysis of affordability, an action plan, referrals, and a reasonable effort at follow-up. So that's how HUD views housing counseling, and that's why we think it's transformational. The client changes as a result of their interaction with the counselor and hopefully moves closer to achieving their housing goals. Next slide. In fiscal 16, we reached 1.2 million clients through the program. A third of them were just in an education setting where they received information, but the remainder that was counseled, the most frequent type of counseling was mortgage delinquency counseling, with pre-purchase followed closely thereafter. Those numbers are changing a lot. We let each agency decide how best to serve their market. And we're seeing a rapid reduction in services for mortgage delinquency and foreclosure prevention. That's partly because the demand is changing, but it's also because the funding is changing and a lot of the support for foreclosure prevention counseling has gone away. So we help agencies make that transition and provide a lot of training and expertise for them if they decide they want to change their programs in these ways. Next slide. We've begun polling outcomes for the program, and in fiscal 16, I think the outcomes are very impressive. You know, almost 400,000 people developed a budget with their counselor. Almost 200,000 improved their financial capacity by showing a tangible improvement in their credit score, for example, or their savings. We deliver a lot of fair housing information, and almost 200,000 got down payment assistance or eviction prevention or a safety net fund through their work with a housing counselor. Next slide, please. Craig mentioned the empirical evidence, and we have on our website something like 30 studies that have been done of housing counseling over the years, but many of them are recent, and more of them are randomized experimental studies. Every study, frankly, shows positive or neutral correlations. Some of the studies are more rigorous than others, but the effectiveness is measured, and it's pretty darn impressive, and these are just some of the examples of that. HUD, by the way, well, let's go to the next slide. HUD is engaged in a long-term randomized study, and we're very excited with the initial results, which are on our website. We have some initiatives, including a real focus on awareness and visibility, and Craig talked a lot about the need for that. This poster can be downloaded from our website. We've distributed it to our agencies. We have flyers for counselors to assist in disaster recovery, and we're developing toolkits, including toolkits specifically for reaching out to lenders and real estate professionals. Our Federal Advisory Committee has launched its first year, and they're fabulous, and they include representatives from mortgage, real estate, housing counseling, and consumer groups. So we're excited about their recommendations. Next slide. Our grants did go out last week. Our appropriation for 17 was an increase over the previous year, although I have to say that was at the time that Congress eliminated the National Foreclosure Counseling Mitigation Program. So the net federal support for counseling from the federal budget was reduced by $32 million over the past year. We gave awards to agencies, mostly intermediaries and state housing finance agencies, who in turn subgrant to many more than the 155 there. And we also have training grants to our nationally training organization. Next slide. I'm getting a little background noise, so I don't know if one of the speakers needs to mute. I want to dive into certification now and keep going, Rebecca. And just let you know that this is one of the biggest changes that the industry will see, and we're very, very excited about it and proud of it. Congress required, and we have started to implement, a requirement that any housing counseling provided in connection with any HUD program must be performed by a HUD certified counselor. And the definition of a certified counselor has two parts. Someone who's passed the HUD certification examination, so you're going to be tested, and also works for a HUD approved housing counseling agency. Now this certification requirement has a number of changes for the industry. It means that any housing counseling that's connected to HUD is going to have to meet the standards of the HUD approved housing counseling program, and that individual counselors will have had to pass an exam and be employed by or work for a HUD approved agency. Next slide. So why in the world would we launch a test and try to standardize housing counseling so broadly? We think there are a lot of benefits of counseling here, and one of the key ones, and the reason the industry has been so supportive of this, is that it will create a professional credential and one that's backed by the federal government. I don't need to tell you all the amount of scamming that goes on here. I have to say, every week I get notice of somebody else ripping off people for millions of dollars in the mortgage or real estate arena for services that the HUD network offers for free. So hopefully by elevating this certification, consumers will have a place to go to check whether the person they're dealing with is trustworthy. But we also think it will improve the quality of counseling. It'll be a better way, another way to elevate awareness and increase visibility, et cetera. Next slide. The certification doesn't only apply to HUD-approved housing counseling agencies today. This is a part that I really want to emphasize. If a municipality uses HUD Community Development Block Grant money to fund a counseling program, and if they subgrant today to some HUD-approved agencies and some that are not. By the time this final rule is effective in 3 years from now, in 2020, all housing counseling that's supported by HUD or required by HUD is going to have to be regulated or part of the HUD-approved housing counseling program, and the counselors will have to be certified. So programs in public housing, home, and CDBG are affected. Family self-sufficiency programs for ownership are affected. Housing choice voucher ownership option is affected. Home development of single-family homes. The counseling that's required as part of that will have to be done by a certified counselor when this rule is finally implemented. Recognizing that breadth, we've tried to narrowly define what housing counseling is so that folks who, for example, are helping do comprehensive case management with the shelter programs would not have to become HUD certified counselors. Next slide, please. So the goal in the end is that these are resources that tell you more about certification and about our program, and we really are excited about helping the industry adjust to these changes and take it to the next level. The vision is that during the next 3 years, nonprofits who are working in this area of housing counseling and working in these neighborhoods will have the opportunity to have their work elevated for us to shine a spotlight and say they're now becoming certified, and hopefully we'll be promoting with the same types of language and messaging that Craig suggests. But I'm pleased to now turn it to Lot so that he can, we're going to hold questions, but so that he can tell you a little more about how the heck to pay for this stuff. So let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. My name's Lot Diaz. I'm with now Unidos US, formerly National Council of ARASA. Craig started with an excellent presentation, kind of condition the market, the role the state of homeownership role counseling can play. Sarah gave you a really comprehensive look at how her office and that agency, which has been seminal to both the expansion and development of housing counseling. I'm going to take the standpoint from individual counseling organization intermediaries themselves and how they're responding to this changing environment that's radical in many levels. So this first slide is really a look at the housing counseling industry in kind of 3 swaths that I've been, for sake of background, NCLR has been a HUD intermediary since 1998 when we started with 4 agencies, and currently we have 51 and have provided collectively over 730,000 clients, counseled over 730,000 clients over the years, of which over 80% were in communities of color. So we've been at it a long time, and as we look back at it, or look at it as I see it, there's the olden days, which I call the 80s up to the 2000s, where in the early 80s, housing counseling was primary mortgage delinquency counseling, servicing FHA loans. And as the 80s and 90s progressed, it increasingly shifted more to support homeownership. And when I confronted it in the late 80s, I worked for a nonprofit and was part of that team that was managing the housing effort, and got a really close look at the impact that it can have with families who come through the program. And then, during those olden days, housing intermediaries the concept of that were developed, expanded. Previous focus on delinquency, rental, energy assistance, homeless was more dominant early period. More funding became available as time went on. Excuse me, and the pre-purchase market became a larger part of the work. And then in 1998, which I started, probably people could argue if it started earlier or later, but I call the Wild West days, a pre-crisis. And it was an era that the old analogy, if you could breathe, you could get a mortgage. Put a couple things, appreciation will cure all ills. In those areas, products were mobile. You couldn't nail down lenders on pricing hardly ever. It was a really very difficult, very different change from the previous period, which was kind of really focused on fixed rate, well underwritten loans if a family was going to get through a product. And so during those periods, HCAs were able to, and we were a big promoter of this, to make lender partnerships, many of them for fee-for-service. In fact, lenders in those days were really aggressive in trying to get market access through housing counseling agencies. And the agencies themselves were both a break to the madness and really became a source of great ways for families to avoid or deal with issues that were bad loans they were getting into. Anyway, it was, as we all came to know, it was quite, the underwriting standards were reduced to a point where when the bubble burst, when the real estate market burst, the foreclosure crisis began. All the damage that was done to many families came to fruition. The foreclosure crisis changed the housing industry a lot. It moved significantly back in from pre-purchase, which was the dominant service line in most agencies, then where slowly shift were reversed, where foreclosure prevention counseling was the dominant service line. Counseling staffs expanded generally because of NFMC funding primarily, but also servicers and lenders were providing a lot of resources to the system. A bunch of new counseling models began. Telephonic counseling had a big expansion. Other models of local counseling changed, both in how to attract clients and how to process them, and once they came to the agency. More technology came into counseling, and also more training began to be offered. HUD, as Sarah mentioned, provided more training for HUD housing counseling, and so you saw a plethora of opportunities for counselors to get more training. In the end, though, the thing is that the capacity we're now kind of ending that period, so to speak. I didn't put an ending date because I'm not sure what the new mortgage market, where we're going finally yet. It's still, to me, in a big state of transition. But for counseling, they had to have this capacity. The foreclosure crisis and resources were dwindling. They had to identify new sources and ways to direct their capacity. Next slide. Could you get the next slide, please?
I did, and it's not showing up, so we're having another challenge with the webinar. So hold on just 1 second.
Well, I can.
While I try to.
Well, while she's looking, I'll just keep talking so we don't waste. What you would be seeing is a pretty elaborate diagram of our program, and the reason what happened during that same period, particularly as we got to tail end of the crisis, the idea of integrating housing counseling into other services became really important. So had lots of meetings with the financial industries to see how we can better integrate counseling and find a compensation model that would reflect the value added that it added to the process. And this, the picture I have, we connected it to all our services that we had, and that ranged from marketing campaigns with a telephonic counseling effort that we created. We created financial capability in which housing counselors and their agencies became both a source of modeling and a source of new services in that. We used them in our training program because we sourced both some of the content we we provided, but a lot of all the instructors that we use are coming from housing counseling organizations in our network. And even we created a separate organization called Hogar Hispano to purchase REO and distress notes, and we embedded housing counseling as an integral part of anything a family experiences through those programs. The point here is that it became the counselors generally many were focusing, we needed to integrate housing counseling to other services that are available, and that would ensure both an ability to utilize the capacity that we've been gained and also find new sources of revenue. And then, so what happens then? So what's the trend now that we're in this new normal, for lack of a better term? What's happening to housing counseling organizations generally? As Sarah mentioned, the federal government pulled $32 million out of the system. If you additional dollars support left from as lenders, assessors, distress note portfolios reduced, their need to invest for the service reduced, and so that left the system. So you have smaller staffs generally relating to that loss of income. So in our case, for instance, our base was 220 counselors, and the last 8 months we've lost 40 of them. So there's been a fairly steep decline on capacity. In addition to that, because again the resources are down, they're being repurposed to other programs and in the agency. We've seen a lot of job shifting as well, and so that's one thing that we do know. The second thing, and probably the most important thing, at least for the long term, is there's a need to reestablish fee-for-service relationships with the lending community. Right now, since the crisis, before the crisis I mentioned, there was quite a bit of it going. Lenders were drafting various agreements and various agreement types with nonprofits. Next slide. They established many different types of fee-for-service agreements in the new regulatory environment with CFPB and their rules. Previously, HUD had established some rules we could work with to establish fee-for-service relationship with lenders. When we tried to kind of take those out in the post-crisis relationships, it met with a lot of uncertainty in terms of lenders saying this doesn't comply with CFPB. So there's been a lot of work done in that realm, and we've made a lot of progress to the point where I think we're in a place where we can start reestablishing these fee-for-service relationships, but that's still something that still needs to be completed and we'll move forward with. And then Craig mentioned this. There's a lot of synergy between lenders and counseling organizations. Lender declines are really high. Someone who goes through a counseling organization, their declines are very low to non-existent. So matching up those systems and all types of loans could be very beneficial, and it's a matter of making those connections, and there's lots of folks trying different things to make that happen. And then the kind of final segment of this is alternative trends in the counseling mode. Folks are broadening their staff and incorporating into different program types. One of the major increases has been major program increases. There's something they call financial capability, which a lot of staff resources are now being shifted to. And if you go to the next slide, you see just a quick thing. What we call financial capability is really a compilation of a lot of services. One is education, just skills, knowledge, and what they're doing, and then an individualized picture of that, both from a counseling sense and a long-term coaching sense. But it also is we always imagine it to be accompanied by some financial service or goal to help them to kind of purpose the knowledge into some forward-thinking long-term goal. So we have been working on this for the last 5 years and have quite a few models we've dabbled with. And I'm going to end with the last one, which is the last slide. And it's a model that we're working with the Financial Clinic, who's a nonprofit out of New York, who the goal here is to incorporate financial capability to create more financial security within the clients, within folks seen through nonprofits. And financial security for us is assets saved consistently, banking, reduced cost of financial transactions, improve credit score, decrease debt, saving, save portions of tax refund for financial goals, and kind of action plan to achieve those goals. What's unique about this is two things. One is we're not partnering only. Housing counseling agencies are kind of the back room of this stuff, meaning they're doing the long-term financial coaching. The front end, or the front end of the funnel is other service providers who see clients who could benefit from financial capability and at a variety of levels. So the levels include, telephonic, in-person, and counseling that'll be available in a system that the nonprofit partner can access by just referring to a toll-free number. The idea here is to get people more cognizant of their financial situation and provide support for knowledge and kind of better their chance to achieve goals, whatever they're doing. Initially, we actually, and this is my final point on this with financial capability, we think it's an important embedded service that could be provided and is being provided in a variety of settings, and there's a lot of evidence that it makes the difference on the margin, and we're setting out to kind of see, from our standpoint, see how that actually improves other service providers' outcomes with the clients they see, in addition to whatever the gains are with the individual family. And with that, I'll end.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. And I apologize for that technical difficulty in the middle of Lot's presentation. But before getting to questions, just want to thank Craig, Sarah, and Lot. That information was so helpful and valuable to be thinking about. And to start us off with Q&A, we got a version of this question from one of our attendees. But let's dive into this. How do we make housing counseling sustainable going forward? And so kind of two questions that hopefully you can all chime in on in terms of what are some compensation models going forward that would help with housing counseling, helping it to grow to meet what we know the demand is, and also when thinking about those models, who's paying for the counseling, the lender, the borrower, thoughts about that, or government, as we have some of that funding now, but the tight budget environment. So anyway, thoughts on compensation and sustainable funding for housing counseling.
Yeah, this is Lot. I'll take a stab at that because we've been working a lot on that aspect. Right now, the standard, if there is a standard to exist, it's a closed family through pre-purchase counseling is $500. And the compensating, when I say that that's the standard that Fannie Mae uses, and it's a relatively new program, it's the standard, it's kind of the amount that's talked about currently. There are exceptions to that depending on who the lender is. The National Mortgage Collaborative has a very different pricing model, much higher. It is much more oriented to embedding counseling in the origination process from the front end, including collecting docs and getting the family ready to get a complete application ready to go. The issues on it is what the market will bear, right? And since there's very little fee-for-service in the pre-purchase sense being accomplished, it's hard to say what that is. There a standard price? And so, as I mentioned in the regulatory discussion, we hope that the regulatory issue that has been a stumbling block is close to being removed, or in part being removed. And the idea is that once lenders feel comfortable with that fee-for-service, I think they're going to end up with the Fannie Mae amount initially until volumes and new service, kind of you see families going through the system through in under that new program.
Yeah, I just add a couple of things to what Lot mentioned. I totally agree with Lot on his assessment. I think, one of the things we have to sell better to the mortgage industry is not just the value. I mean, we've been talking about the empirical evidence, and I think the lending community is becoming more aware of it, accepting. We have to sort of change again that notion of paradigm. We have lenders out there, particularly depositories that have CRA obligations, that at closing will pay to a household, to a first-time low and moderate income household, $3,500 to $5,000 that can go to its closing costs, down payment assistance, whatever. That's how interested they are in reaching these segments. Fannie and Freddie are working on models, some that you're aware of, some that haven't hit the light of day yet, where they would provide significant assistance to a household. Well, maybe 1/10 of that $5,000 to the counseling agency would do wonders in terms of sourcing, in terms of simplifying the process for a lender, in terms of making the equation actually more economic, because the nonprofit could do some of the hand-holding that the lender is ill-suited to perform. So I think it's eminently doable. I do think, and my colleagues here, Sarah and Lot, may not agree with this, I do think we need to consider the borrower actually contributing to this as well. This home buyer coaching may need a more consistent approach in terms of how we engage them and what the cost of vetting and doing the remedial work would entail. That $500 that Lot mentions, or even that $5,000 I mentioned that comes from some of the banks to get the business, is at closing. So it's for the closed loan. I think we need something from the consumer that is upfront, that pays to investigate, explore, determine outcomes, to run things through technology in order to ascertain how ready folks have been. And then one last thing here, Rebecca, and I'm probably taking this out of the Sarah and HUD script, but Sarah mentioned something very important about the certification process they've done. And, some have pushed back and saying, well, why do we need a certification and why does it include everybody? For me, it's all about 5 C's. And this is going to be corny, I know, but the 5 C's that'll get us where we need to go. If we have certification across the board in the housing counseling world, we will end up with another C, consistency. And if we have consistency, that builds among the lenders and real estate professionals confidence. If we can engender greater confidence, that means there's going to be partnerships, but I'm going to use the C word here, collaboration, and the collaboration is going to result in compensation. It's doable. The number to me is somewhat less important than developing this new paradigm where they feel like they need us. Real estate professionals often don't trust that if they send someone to a nonprofit that they'll get them back. Lenders have that same concern. If we can change that to be, we understand what you do, we know there's consistency in what you do, we know you've got the technology, we're confident you have the technology to work with us and send the client back when they're ready for access to mortgage credit, then we're willing to pay for that. I think this is eminently doable.
Very briefly, HUD is all for everybody contributing who gets value, and I would just underscore that the consumer gets a lot of value and consumer pay is not the standard. But then I do think the more you've got consumer demand for this service, the more it will also be easier to embed and integrate, and consumer demand comes when agencies make it attractive to consumers. Right now, the consumers are often bribed by the down payment assistance and come in that way. Think about, and HUD's research has shown some eye-openers around, what would make this service attractive to consumers, so they want it as much as they want the next iPhone. That's what I've strived for. Make it as sexy and attractive as possible to the consumer, and that also aligns with the compensation.
That's a good point, Sarah. Getting that housing counseling on the front end is just a normal part of the process, and being demanded by more consumers would be a big step. We do have another question on this topic that I want to get to, which is, are any of you aware of mortgage insurance companies looking at paying for housing counseling, given all the evidence that it can reduce loan defaults and improve performance? Any mortgage insurance companies kind of expressing interest?
That's a great question, and I've always been a little baffled that they weren't more interested. There are some partnerships with one or two companies I've heard about, and Craig and Lot may know of more, be more specific. But I understand, so I think that's an area worth exploring as well.
Yeah, I agree. This is Craig. There's two of the bigger private mortgage insurers that are, I'm not sure if they have anything on the street yet, but are talking about that. And I had a discussion with one of them just yesterday. And Sarah's right. I mean, it's in their self-interest. My goodness, their business is the above 80% LTV lending. And invariably, having a better prepared borrower, who can it benefit more other than the consumer than the mortgage insurer? So we are trying to get them to be part of that mix as well, and perhaps we need to develop some pilots that will demonstrate to them how it can work.
Great. I do want to touch on one other thing that Sarah has been graciously answering for folks in the question box, but just so folks are aware, some clarity around the housing counseling certification test. We had a question about if there's multiple versions and if counselors have to take it at the same time if they work for the same agency. So just to be clear, each counselor takes the test, the certification test, individually, and there are options to take that online or at a proctoring site. And all counselors have to be certified by August 1st, 2020, but not all counselors within the same agency need to do it at the same time. And for a housing counseling agency to continue providing HUD-approved housing counseling and receive funding, they do have to be HUD certified and have HUD-certified housing counselors, but I will let Sarah speak to that more specifically.
That's exactly right. If you know, we have basically a 3-year period to get everyone to the point of certification. The agencies have to comply by employing certified counselors and reporting the counseling to us that's done by certified counselors. And the counselors themselves, basically to keep their counseling job, will have to pass the examination. You only have to pass the exam once. It will be offered in English and Spanish. And we've reduced the cost tremendously. When we first published a preliminary rule, we estimated the cost at about $500. We have just published our current cost, which is, I'm going to get a, I want to make sure I'm correct. I believe it's $60 for online and $100 for proctoring. But you should check our website to confirm, because we may change that based on our cost to deliver the test. We've tried to make it affordable, easy to access, and make sure you're all well prepared for it.
And related to that, Sarah, I believe that you guys just put out the practice exam, is that right?
Yes, just last week we were able to publish the practice exam so that you're able to try it yourself. We do encourage studying first, and we do have our own practice guide, but our training partners, including Unidos US, do offer classes for the exam online and in person. And the practice exam will tell you if there were areas you missed that you may need to study more. But there are 6 competency areas within the exam, 6 subject areas, and you have to have a passing score for the entire exam. So if the practice exam will tell you whether there are areas you need to work on.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing more questions come in, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I did have a question asking about housing goals, so I want to touch on that really briefly, since I didn't really do that justice earlier. So the Federal Housing Finance Agency has released proposed housing goals for 2018 to 2020. So comments are due September 5th. Under the proposed goals, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would provide mortgages for 315,000 low-income multifamily units per year, and that is an increase over the last round of goals for 2015 to 2017. The number of small multifamily would remain the same. And just to be clear, these goals are separate. Housing goals are separate from the duty to serve requirements that FHFA has also been rolling out recently. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ethan and Caitlin to share a quick announcement from NHC before we wrap up.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I just wanted to put this on everyone's radar. November 29th will be our Solutions for Affordable Housing Conference. And this event will bring together officials from the new administration and local practitioners to offer both practical and political advice on how to advance housing policy. And so through a variety of topics, we're going to be discussing how state and local communities are responding to their housing needs and how the federal government is partnering with these efforts. So right now we just have the date and we're working on securing speakers, so we will keep you updated as we get speakers and as we open registration, but I just want to get it on everyone's calendar as a save the date.
Thanks, Caitlin. So with that, we will release you back to your day. Again, thanks so much to everyone for joining us. For folks who are new, we will be sharing the slides and the notes so that you have all the information that we share today. Again, thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.